Hi there, Allison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to the Walla Walla Valley in Washington State, and we're looking at the Echolands Winery 2019 Cabernet Franc. Echolands was established in 2018 by Master of Wine and Master Sommelier Doug Frost and conservationist Brad Bergman. Born in Portland, Oregon, Doug has always been a champion of the wines of the Pacific Northwest, and in particular, he's a big fan of Washington State Cabernet Franc. This project was created out of the desire to not only showcase the range of terroirs from across the Walla Walla Valley, but also to bring greater attention and recognition to Cabernet Franc from the Walla Walla and the diversity of expressions of the grape from across the region. Doug, with the help of his winemaker Brian Rubin and vineyard managers Sadie Drury and Nick McKay, together they're currently working with around 9 acres of Cabernet Franc vines that are planted across 3 vineyard sites in the Walla Walla Valley. The Taggart Vineyard and Seven Hills Vineyard are both located on the Oregon side of the AVA, and the Blue Mountain Vineyard, which is where today's wine is coming from, is located on the Washington State side of the AVA, and they will be planting more Cabernet Franc at their newly acquired site along Mill Creek, just east of the town of Walla Walla. This 2019 vintage is actually the inaugural bottling of a standalone Cabernet Franc for the winery. The Walla Walla Valley was established in 1984, and it is the second oldest AVA in Washington State after the Yakima Valley. This region is unique in that the AVA boundaries are located across 2 states. About 2/3 of the area of the AVA is located in Washington State, and about 1/3 of the area is in Oregon. But in terms of the vineyards themselves, the vineyard area, it's almost evenly split, with about 57% of the vineyards located in Washington State and about 43% of the vineyards located in Oregon. While across Washington State as a whole, red wine accounts for around 60% of the state's total production, the Walla Walla Valley is a red wine specialist region, and about 95% of the area under vine in the AVA is planted with red varieties, in particular Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah, which account for around 36% and 18% respectively. And Cabernet Franc is the 4th most planted grape variety at about 7% of the area under vine. And with the diversity of microclimates and soil combinations across the various subzones in the Walla Walla Valley, Cabernet Franc is emerging as a very interesting grape variety, particularly as a single varietal wine in select pockets across the Walla Walla Valley. So the Walla Walla Valley is located in the southeast corner of Washington State and the northeast corner of Oregon. And we're at around 46 degrees north latitude, which is a little bit further north than Bordeaux and a little bit further south than Burgundy. The climate would be considered continental, with hot summers and cold winters. And as is the case with the majority of the wine-growing regions in Washington State, the Walla Walla Valley is on the east side of the Cascade Mountains, which provides a rain shadow effect, blocking out the precipitation from the Pacific Ocean. And this contributes to the region's very low rainfall, as well as the slightly higher sunshine hours it experiences during the growing season. In general, the Walla Walla Valley is considered to be one of the warmest and windiest of all the growing regions in Washington State. But of course, there is quite a bit of nuance here that is worth exploring. So the Walla Walla Valley is bound to the east by the Blue Mountains, to the southwest by the Van Sickle Ridge, and to the north by the Palouse Hills. And the majority of the vineyards here are dotted along a stretch of about 35 kilometers, or about 20 miles or so, that starts just south of the town of Milton Freewater in Oregon, and then continues to stretch northeast south of the town of Walla Walla, and then continues into the northeast corner of the AVA. The elevations range quite a bit across the region, from as low as around 120 meters above sea level to upwards to 600 meters above sea level. And because of the influence of the mountains, this range of elevation, and the rather warm temperatures that the growing region experiences during the summer months, site selection for Cabernet Franc becomes quite critical, because Cabernet Franc in general does prefer slightly cooler conditions in order to retain its varietal character, elegance, and finesse. So the Walla Walla Valley is a fair size, and there is quite a bit of diversity from site to site. So I'm going to do my very best to try and provide a general overview of the various growing environments and microclimates that we see, and soils as well, across this region. So on the valley floor, this is at elevations of around 240 to 285 or so meters above sea level. Here during the growing season, the daytime temperatures will be much warmer and the evening temperatures will be much colder because the cold air descends down from the mountains and settles on the valley floor here. And this creates a very wide diurnal range in temperatures. It is not unusual for the daytime temperatures during the summer months to climb to upwards to 38 degrees Celsius during the day and dip to 15 degrees, sometimes even 10 degrees Celsius at night. But these cold nights are beneficial because, of course, they help to slow down ripening and preserve acidities. Now, in terms of soils on the valley floor, we will generally find two kinds of soils. The majority of the vineyards are located on a thick layer of wind-blown loess, and this has a silty texture, and then this overlays the Missoula slack water sediments. So we're dealing with very, very thick, deep soils here that have a rather silty, sandy texture to them. And then we have two alluvial fans here on the valley floor, and these are flanked along the Walla Walla River and Mill Creek. And here the soils are quite stony, and we're dealing with primarily basalt cobblestone gravels. And this soil is actually most notable around the Rocks District, which is actually its own AVA within the Walla Walla Valley. Now at slightly higher elevations in the foothills, this is where things get kind of interesting, particularly for Cabernet Franc. So in the foothills, we are in the east, we're in the foothills of the Blue Mountains. To the southwest, we're in the foothills of the Van Sickle Ridge. And then to the north, we're in the foothills of the Palouse Hills. And here we're at elevations of around 310 to upwards to 480 or so meters above sea level. And because of the undulating nature of these foothills, we will find any number of exposures. And of course, this will have an impact on ripening. But in general, up in the foothills here, the daytime temperatures tend to be a little bit cooler, but the evening temperatures tend to be a little bit warmer because that cold air sinks down to the lower elevations on the valley floor. So we don't see quite as wide of a diurnal range in temperatures. Also here in the foothills, it's actually quite a bit windier as well. And the wind and the velocity of the wind will actually create warmer conditions later in the season. Finally, here in the foothills, we will see less frost risk and also a little bit more precipitation. So in general, here in the foothills, we have slightly cooler conditions, but a slightly longer growing season as well. Now, in terms of soils in these higher elevation areas, we generally find two types of soils in different places. On the gentler slopes, we'll find a thicker layer of loess, those wind-blown sediments, and that sits atop the basalt bedrock. And then on the steep slopes and canyons, we will find a very thin layer of that loess. And it is so thin, in fact, that the rooting zone can actually be impacted by this basalt bedrock below. Now, in both instances, this loess has a silty loam texture, and the stoniness can vary a little bit depending on where you are. But this area in the foothills in particular is starting to show really good promise in terms of Cabernet Franc plantings because of the fact that we are in slightly cooler conditions, and in the case of the gentler slopes, we have slightly deeper soils here. And that, of course, brings me to today's wine. So the Blue Mountain Vineyard is emerging as a very important site for Cabernet Franc in the Walla Valley. So there's about 23 acres of Cabernet Franc planted here. That's just under 1/5 of the entire vineyard area of the Blue Mountain Vineyard. And this vineyard is located just east of the town of Walla Walla, and we are in the foothills of the Blue Mountains here, and we're at an average elevation of around 360 meters above sea level. And this vineyard is actually one of the coolest sites and one of the latest ripening sites in the entire Walla Walla Valley. Doug is working with around 2 acres here, and his vines were planted in 2011. And his block is oriented a little bit to the north. And in terms of soils, we are dealing with those deeper silty loam soils. Now, there is drip irrigation installed, which is of course very common across the Walla Walla Valley because of the low rainfall. And then in terms of vineyard practices, the vineyard is farmed sustainably with organic practices, and they will strive to keep the yields on the lower side, less than 2 tons per acre. Now, in terms of winemaking, as I mentioned off the top, this is the inaugural bottling of a standalone Cabernet Franc for the winery. And Doug told me that they will be adapting their winemaking practices depending on the vintage. And vintage variation is certainly a thing in the Walla Walla Valley. So they will kind of adapt their winemaking to the vintage depending on what that vintage gives. So in the case of the 2019 vintage, this was all hand-harvested fruit, destemmed, and it was all crushed. And fermentation is in stainless steel with ambient yeast. And 2019 was a cooler vintage, so they went a little lighter on the extractions. The total time on skins was around 10 days. And then the aging was for about 16 months in French oak barrels. And that's a combination of barriques as well as puncheons. And about 20% of that is new. So, before I actually get into this wine, just a quick thank you to my friend Eduardo Bolaños, who's a sommelier in Los Angeles. And Eduardo was kind enough to send me this bottle to try. He was adamant that this was a wine that I needed to get my hands on. So he was kind enough to send me this bottle from LA. So thank you so much, Eduardo, for making that effort. I really appreciate it. All right, so on the nose first and foremost is quite perfumed. And has a beautiful purity and freshness to it. And I would say that the fruits lean a little bit more on the red side. Bit of cherry here, there's a little bit of raspberry. There's also a little bit of a blueberry note as well, which I really like. And I would say in general that the nose kind of leans a little bit more on the savory side, which I really like. And I love the balance of the pyrazines here. It's a combination of cedar wood. There's a little bit of cedar leaves here as well. I'm getting a little bit of sage too, which is nice. And as I mentioned, the wine is quite perfumed. There are some nice pink and purple floral notes here as well. In general, yeah, I'm very into the nose on this wine. On the palate, those fruits are confirmed. They lean a smidge tartar, which is nice. And I would say the fruit profile is kind of in that pomegranate cranberry thing, as well as those cherry notes and that wild blueberry note as well. I'm getting more complexities in terms of the savoriness of this wine on the palate as well. A little bit of thyme. There's a bit of scorched earth here. There's even like a little bit of a mushroom thing. The palate is also quite spicy, and I did note some spice elements on the nose, but it was kind of coming through as a bit more of a wood spice element on the nose, whereas on the palate, I'm getting some varietal spice, which is really lovely. So the spice on the palate is it's a mix of green and black peppercorns, and then there's a little bit of wood spice here, like clove, allspice, cinnamon, stuff like that. And in general, the acidity of this wine is really bright, really crisp, really lively. And the tannins are quite fine, and they have a nice firmness to them as well. Yeah, so on the palate, the tannins have a nice silky texture to them and a little bit of a sandiness on the finish, which is nice. And the elevated acidity is providing, along with the tannins, of course, is providing like this nice structure to the wine. In general, this wine has a really nice juiciness on the palate. There's a nice middle palate experience going on here. The wine is really balanced. It leans a little bit more kind of on the lean side, very finesse driven, very elegant. There's a lot of restraint here as well, which I really like. And that elevated acidity is actually making me think of food pairings. Like, I think this is going to be a really terrific food wine. And in general, the thing that I think I appreciate about this wine the most is the fact that it feels like it was made to be Cabernet Franc. And I recognize that probably sounds really silly to most people, but I have tasted some Cabernet Francs that are really not made to be Cabernet Franc. You know, they are made to be either Pinot-like, or they're made to be Cabernet Sauvignon-like and fuller and bigger, or even they're made to just be like a generic red wine, and you kind of lose the identity of the grape and the place in the glass in these instances. And this wine really feels like it was made to be Cabernet Franc. Like, there was a really good understanding of the vineyard, of the grape variety, variety of what the grapes were giving in the moment, and a really, really wonderful respect for the grape and a respect for the place in an effort to try and communicate, that this is coming from somewhere special. And I really do appreciate that about this wine. And there aren't a lot of single varietal Cabernet Francs coming out of Washington State at the moment, but I've tasted a couple, and I'm very excited to hopefully maybe try more at some point along the way. But really, this is a really delicious example of a single varietal Cabernet Franc from the Walla Walla Valley. And you know what? I'm excited. I'm excited to follow the Echolands journey and to see what Doug continues to do with this grape variety in Walla Walla Valley. He's even making a pet nat at a Cabernet Franc, which is awesome. So this is definitely a winery to watch if you are a Cab Franc fan and love the wines of Washington State. If you've happened to have the Echolands Cabernet Franc at some point, this is the first vintage. The next vintage coming out will be 2021, which should be released very soon. If you've had the pleasure of having this wine, do let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.